American Legion posts sponsor thousands of scouting units, serving more than 60,000 young people nationwide. The National Commissioner of the Boy Scouts of America earned a bachelor's degree at Brigham Young University and a JD at the University of Utah. He has previously served as the 20th president of the Young Men organization of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the National Commissioner of the Boy Scouts of America, Charles Dahlquist.
Good afternoon. I love the way you respond, both when somebody says good morning or good afternoon, but also when you say amen. You don't see that very often, so thank you very much. I'm honored to be here for this wonderful convention. It's been good being here since early this morning and also joining you last evening for the Commander's Dinner. I have learned an awful lot about the American Legion. In fact, in preparation for this, I watched some YouTubes, and I got so excited watching the YouTubes that I went online and registered as a new member of the American Legion. So I am in, and I'm thrilled to be here as representative of the Boy Scouts of America. Thank you for all you do, not only for what you do looking back and making sure that those who have defended our country and served and our veterans are taken care of, but also in looking forward and making sure that the rising generation is taken care of and well schooled. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here to celebrate this almost 100-year partnership. You may not know that in 1919, when the American Legion was organized at its first convention, one of the very first items of business was to recognize the Boy Scouts of America and begin this wonderful partnership. And today, the American Legion sponsors 50,000 scouts and has 2,200 leaders, 22,000 leaders, who are making a great difference. There's a great poem that goes, "We are blind until we see that in the eternal plan, nothing's worth the making if it does not make the man. Why build these cities glorious if man unbuilded goes? In vain we build the work, unless the builder also grows." And these youth of the rising generation are the builders. So thanks to each of you for sponsoring troops, Cub Packs, Explorer units, venture crews all over this great country. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now in July, I had the opportunity of being with Commander Schmidt at the National Scout Jamboree at the summit in West Virginia. Wonderful, beautiful, almost heaven, West Virginia. And it was wonderful to have Commander Schmidt there, but there was something that was missing. And that is every leader, at least in scouting, needs to have a walking stick. And so Commander Schmidt, I have something for you. He's right in the middle of a very important meeting. I don't want to. Commander Schmidt, when you and I met at the summit, you didn't have a walking stick.
True.
And you needed a walking stick. So I have one here that is engraved. It says Charles E. Schmidt, National Commander, American Legion, 2016, 2017, 2017 National Scout Jamboree. It has the logo of the American Legion on it, of the Summit Scout Ranch, of the Jamboree, and most importantly, when you go hiking, you always wear hiking boots, right?
Yes, sir.
And so does your walking stick.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, my pleasure. When I was a young cadet in the Air Force ROTC program, we didn't have an awful lot of money, and so I worked nights at KSL at a Clear Channel radio station. And during that time, there was a man by the name of Charlie Freed who taped a program every night that I was there. And the program was called Windows. And what he would do, he would talk about a day in history, And then at the end of that, and he'd talk about what happened and the people that were impacted. And then at the end, he'd say, and that's the way it was, August 5th, 1947, as we watched from windows at KSL, home of radio. Our lives are a series of windows, and because of what you do with the Boy Scouts of America, you are making windows for these young people that will impact their lives forever. Let me just give you one example. One window occurred in the life of Andy Flossdorf a number of years ago. This 13-year-old boy was a normal garden variety young man, but just happened to be a great speller. He was involved in the National Spelling Bee in Washington, D.C. He came from Fonda, New York. Andy got up and was asked to spell echolalia. He spelled it. The judges weren't sure that he spelled it correctly, and so they went back and listened, and then they approved it. Andy then sat down. One of his friends said, "So how did you spell it?" And all of a sudden he realized that he had spelled it incorrectly. Not the way that the judges thought it might have been, but he had used an E instead of the first A. So he went to the judges, and he went to Chief Judge Robert Baker, and he said, "I misspelled echolalia." The judge said, "No, we went through it." He said, "No, I misspelled the word." They went back over the tapes, and sure enough, he had misspelled the word, and as a result, was disqualified from any more participation. Someone from the New York Times, a reporter, said, "Why did you do that?" He said, "Well," he says, "I didn't want to feel like slime." And the typical 13-year-old boy expression. And then he said, "No, why did you do it? It took a lot of courage to do that." This young man said, "I am a Boy Scout, and above all, a Boy Scout is honest." When that was announced to the large gathering in Washington, D.C., there was a standing ovation for this simple, for a 13-year-old boy who realized that very first, scouting, a scout is trustworthy. And it's because of what you do in the lives of these scouts that they stand out wherever they are. That's the reason why a scout, one of your scouts, when he takes a test, keeps his eyes on his own paper, because a scout is honest. A scout is trustworthy. That's why when a scout goes through a door, he always looks behind him to see if there is someone else following for whom he can open the door, because a scout is courteous. There are all types of stories. One particular window that was brought to my attention was by a father who talked about a Pinewood Derby experience that he'd had with his son, Jeffrey. As you may know, every year about the first part of the year, Cub Scouts get together and they make small Pinewood Derby cars and they race them. Well, as is true to form, Jeffrey's father did most of the work on this car, and they went to the Pinewood Derby and they were so proud. The car looked so good, the paint job was good, the decals were great, the wheels were aligned, there was enough graphite to make sure that they ran really well. And when pit row was there before the race began, it was mostly filled with fathers instead of boys. When the races began, the fathers moved out of pit row and the sons began to race the cars. After a few races, Jeffrey was doing pretty well, and he came to his dad and said, "Dad, I need to have you do something with my car." His dad was ready to check the alignment of the wheels, and Jeffrey said, "No, Dad, you don't understand." And he pointed over to a friend of his who obviously had special needs, and he said, "My next race is against Stephen, and Stephen hasn't won a race all night. Will you do something with my car to make sure that Stephen wins?" So his dad first looked at his son, and then he looked at the car. He took the front wheel and he tweaked it just enough so it was out of alignment, gave it back to his son. The two cars were up there, they got ready, the Cubmaster pulled the handle down, the cars went down, and Stephen won. But the dad recalled, when I looked down at the end of that race and the two boys grabbed their cars, I saw two happy boys. You see, Jeffrey learned at the hands of your leaders that a scout is kind, and a scout is helpful, and a scout is courteous. I had a window occur to me just a few months ago when I was on Normandy Beach. I had been asked to speak at an encampment of the North Atlantic Council of the Boy Scouts of America. As I prepared myself, I read all of these books. I read everything that I could. I watched movies. I did everything to prepare, and in the midst of all of that, a thought came to me over and over again. I wonder where Dad was during that time. It haunted me as I read these books and as I watched the movies. Just a week before, I went to some papers that Dad had before he passed away. And in there, as I opened the little box, there was an envelope that I'd never seen before that said Winston's military records. So I opened it up, pulled up his certificate of service, and realized a week before I went to Normandy that Dad was there. For on his record, his discharge record, battles and campaigns, Rhineland, Central Europe, Air Offensive Europe, Normandy, Ardennes. Then I realized what these little V mail notes meant. They didn't mean anything to the family because they didn't realize what my dad never told them. Because Dad never talked about his experiences in the war. I asked him one day, Dad, why don't you talk about them? He said, when you go out and you get one buddy blown off from one side and one shot off from the other side, and that happens day after day, why would you want to talk about it? And yet this individual that I called father and was one of the greatest heroes I ever had, he gave me a wonderful feeling of patriotism for this great country. And so on that day, after I participated in the encampment and walked along Omaha Beach, I tried to picture in my mind what it was like for my father to come on to Utah Beach and for all of those GIs to come on to Omaha Beach on that day when instead of a sunny day, it was overcast and stormy. The next morning we met in the American Cemetery at Colleyville-sur-Mer with 3,500 scouts and leaders and parents. If you've been there, there's a wonderful memorial, and it overlooks 10,000 crosses of many of those who gave the ultimate sacrifice that we might preserve freedoms. And on that day, as I spoke about my experience and my father, I asked those 3,500 young men, many of your scouts, to turn and raise their arm to the square in the scout oath. And together, as we face those crosses of those men who had given their all, we pledged to them that we would live the scout oath all our lives. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, to obey the scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. And then I had each of those young men salute. And together we pledged allegiance and promised our allegiance to those great principles upon which this country was based and for which they gave their lives, that we would forever be true to this great country. Now, in Stephen Ambrose's book on D-Day, there's a great quote. It says, when Hitler declared war on the United States, he bet that the young men brought up in the Hitler Youth would outfight the youngsters brought up in the Boy Scouts. Hitler was about ready to find out how wrong he was. We are together, the Boy Scouts of America and the American Legion, with your four pillars and your prelude to the Constitution and with our scout oath and scout law, we're building a rising generation who will be able to follow in your footsteps and the footsteps of my father and all of those who have gone before to keep this country free. There is too much dissension in this country now, but there are more things that unite us than divide us. And those young men under your tutelage are learning to unite and to bring peace in a troubled world. Somebody once said, if we're really to get serious about world peace, we ought to start at a Scout Jamboree. And my suggestion is we start at a Scout Jamboree, then we come to an American Legion convention, and there we understand what it means to be patriot-loving, freedom-loving, peaceful individuals of this human race. May God bless each of you as you struggle or as you strive to strengthen the youth of the noble birthright, this rising generation. I pledge to you that we as a Boy Scouts of America will continue to do everything in our power to strengthen the youth of today, that they might be strong and understand the principles for which their grandfathers and fathers and mothers and grandmothers lived and died, that we might keep this country free. God bless you for all you do to strengthen the rising generation. I am honored to be part of this great organization. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for that great speech. You know, the Boy Scouts, one of the American Legion's programs, our very first program of youth, giving youth an opportunity. And we had, as the leader of this great organization, the opportunity to go to the Boy Scout Jamboree, which happens every 4 years. And I tell you what, Legionnaires, you never seen nothing like it. 20,000 Boy Scouts, 6,000 volunteers there, young men learning about being a good citizen and learn about patriotism as well, because there were Legionnaires on site, Legionnaires tutoring, helping them young men. And this young man here, the Commissioner of Boy Scouts of America, you would think that he would be in an office or something. And the first time I saw him, they said, "You're going to be meeting the Commissioner of the Boy Scouts of America." And I said, "Well, who is he and where is he?" It's that gentleman over there sitting underneath that cover with a bunch of young men, and he was teaching them different knots. That's the type of leader we have in the Boy Scouts of America. Charles, on behalf of the American Legion, we'd like to present to you our medallion.
Thank you very much.